join the high-speed revolution sweeping the world. It was a vision of a confident nation, a clear signal. Our great towns and cities in the Midlands and the North, with potential that had been untapped at best and ignored at worst, could be places of opportunity and aspiration again. That was the promise of HS2. But after a decade and a half of Tory timelines planned then delayed, routes drawn up then cancelled, budgets calculated then blown, promises made then broken, we inherited a project that had lost the trust of the public, that created an image of a Britain woefully unable to deliver big infrastructure projects, and that axed swathes of the country it was originally meant to serve. Phase 1 could end up becoming one of the most expensive railway lines in the world, with projected costs soaring by £37 billion under previous Conservative governments, and £2 billion of taxpayers' money sunk into Phase 2 work before it was cancelled by the previous government. There was also clear evidence of poor management. Despite the 2020 Okavi review advising that government halt construction contracts pending improvements in price and simpler engineering, they pressed ahead regardless. It has been no less than a litany of failure, and today I'm drawing a line in the sand, calling time on years of mismanagement, flawed reporting and ineffective oversight. It means this government will get the job done between Birmingham and London. We won't reinstate cancelled sections we can't afford, but we will do the hard but necessary work to rebuild public trust, and we've not wasted any time. Since July, we have appointed new leadership of HS2 Limited to turn this project around. We've made clear to the new Chief Executive, Mark Wilde, that the priority is building the rest of the railway safely at the lowest reasonable cost, even if this takes longer. We've started the year-long task of fundamentally resetting the project, including commissioning infrastructure expert James Stewart to lead a review into governance and oversight. As part of that reset, we have reduced financial delegations to HS2 Limited, placing a lid on spiralling costs until the reset is complete and we regain confidence. And we've supported Mark Wilde's review of the size and cost of HS2 as an organisation. But today we're going further. Mr Speaker, I can confirm we've published the landmark James Stewart review and the department's response. The review, commissioned in October of last year by my predecessor, was a tough, independent look at how the Department for Transport and Government delivers major projects. The Government not only welcomes the review, but we have accepted all the recommendations. My department is already delivering on these, specifically across 5 key areas. First, the lack of oversight and scrutiny. Quite simply, there have been too many dark corners for failure to hide in. The Ministerial Task Force, set up to provide oversight of HS2, had inconsistent attendance from key ministers, including the then Transport Secretary and the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury. The Government has re-established the task force with full senior attendance as per the review's recommendations. A new performance programme and shareholder boards will offer much needed oversight and accountability. Secondly, the report highlights HS2 could cost the taxpayer millions more than planned. We'll stop this spiralling any further by delivering all the recommendations on cost control. That starts with HS2 fundamentally changing their approach to estimating costs. It includes certainty over funding, which the spending review has given. And it also means HS2 working with suppliers so their contracts incentivise saving costs for taxpayers. As far as I'm concerned, suppliers should make a better return the more taxpayer money they save. Thirdly, the review identified a deficit in capability and skills, with a fundamental lack of trust between my department and HS2 Limited. I am clear Both capability and cultural issues within HS2 must be addressed. The new Chief Executive is already strengthening the organisation, including filling critical gaps in areas such as commercial expertise. And he will be backed by Mike Brown, announced today as the new chair. This is a new era of leadership the project desperately needs, with Mike bringing significant experience as a former TfL commissioner. Mark and Mike were part of the team with me that turned Crossrail into the Elizabeth line. We've done it before and we'll do it again. Fourthly, Euston Station. Between 2019 and 2023, HS2 Limited provided initial designs for Euston Station, coming in almost £2 billion over budget. When asked for a more affordable option, they offered one, costing £400 million more than the first attempt. The word affordable was clearly not part of the HS2 lexicon. The combined cost for these two failed designs, which has now been written off, was more than £250 million. What's more, the previous government announced a Euston ministerial task force. Unbelievably, the task force never met. Mr. Speaker, this government recognises Euston's huge potential, and we've already committed funding to start the tunnelling from Old Oak Common to Euston, and we'll set out more details in our 10-year infrastructure strategy. And finally, we will use James Stewart's findings to transform infrastructure delivery across government. Implementing real change in how we deliver infrastructure is not just for the Department for Transport. This government is committed to implementing these recommendations and adopting a new approach to delivering infrastructure, as will be set out in our upcoming 10-year infrastructure strategy. In that spirit, the Prime Minister has also asked the Cabinet Secretary to consider the implications for the civil service and wider public sector of the issues raised in the report, including whether further action or investigation is warranted. Mr. Speaker, we're wasting no time in delivering on this review, and I will update Parliament on our progress through my 6 monthly reports, even if the information is uncomfortable. Because for a government that last week pledged billions in capital investment for new major projects, that believes in the power of transport infrastructure to improve lives and deliver on our plan for change, this level of failure cannot stand. We will learn the lessons of the past 15 years and restore our reputation of delivering world-class infrastructure projects. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken about our inheritance. I've spoken about James Stewart's review. Let me finally turn to Mark Wild's initial assessment, which lays bare the shocking mismanagement of the project under previous governments. I will place a copy of his interim findings in the library. He stated in no uncertain terms, the overall project with respect to cost, schedule and scope is unsustainable. Based on his advice, I see no route by which trains can be running by 2033 as planned. He reveals costs will continue to increase if not taken in hand, further outstripping the budget set by the previous government. And he cannot be certain that all cost pressures have yet been identified. Mr. Speaker, it gives me no pleasure to deliver news like this. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted by constant scope changes, ineffective contracts and bad management. There are also allegations that parts of the supply chain have been defrauding taxpayers, and I have been clear these need to be investigated rapidly and rigorously. If fraud is proven, the consequences will be felt by all involved. Mr. Speaker, I have to be honest, it's an appalling mess, but it's one we will sort out. We need to set targets which we can confidently deliver, that the public can trust, and that will take time. But rest assured, where there are inefficiencies, we will root them out. Where further ministerial interventions are needed, I will make them without fear or favour. HS2 will finally start delivering on our watch. Mr. Speaker, years of mismanagement and neglect have turned HS2 into a shadow of that vision put forward 15 years ago. But this government was elected on a mandate to restore trust to our politics. That's why we won't shirk away from this challenge, and why today we turn the page on infrastructure failures. I can think of no better mission than delivering new economic opportunities, new homes and commercial regeneration of an upskilled supply chain, all of which HS2 can still unlock. But no one should underestimate the scale of the reset required. Passengers and taxpayers deserve new railways the country can be proud of. The work to get HS2 back on track is firmly underway under this government, and I commend this statement to the House.
State Gareth Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for her statement today and for updating the House on the initial findings of the HS2 reviews, and I thank her as well for advance notice and copy of it. On the substance of the Secretary of State's statement, I believe there is broad consensus in this House today on the central point, which is that mistakes were made in the delivery of HS2. As the Secretary of State has noted, costs more than doubled, the project has been repeatedly delayed, and the pandemic completely changed travel patterns, undercutting the assumptions that guided the original plans and caused construction costs to rise sharply across the world, in some cases by up to 40%, as a result of the supply chain shortages as the world emerged from the crisis. It has long been apparent that HS2 was not going according to plan. Mr. Speaker, in my first 2 years as a member of this House, I sat on the Public Accounts Committee, then chaired by the Honourable Lady, the member for Hackney South and Shoreditch. In the summer of 2021, we published a report on HS2 raising serious concerns in a number of areas with recommendations for how to improve the project. In 2023, the previous government conceded that HS2 was not going to plan and made fundamental changes to it, and the result of that was the cancellation of the northern leg of HS2 and the creation of the Network North plan. Under that plan, £36 billion was to be diverted from the northern leg of HS2 to a multitude of transport projects that would benefit more people in more places more quickly than the then government believed the delivery of HS2 could. But we also recognise that the path that we took to reach that point was not perfect, far from it. And I will not today pretend that the Network North plan was not a product of mistakes we made in the handling of HS2, because it clearly was. As a country, we must learn from those mistakes and we must not repeat them. It is on that note, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to express my gratitude to Mark Wilde, the Chief Executive Officer of HS2, for his continued efforts in supporting the delivery of the project. Recognising his leadership in rescuing the Crossrail project in London, it was the Noble Lord Harper, then the Secretary of State for Transport, who appointed him to lead HS2 in May 2024. We are all encouraged to see him playing a leading role in overseeing the correction and completion of the project, because his experience will be invaluable in helping to get it back on track. I would also like to welcome the appointment of Mike Brown as the new chairman of HS2 Limited. Like the Secretary of State, I know him from my years in London politics when he was Commissioner of Transport for London. He is a very capable man, and I wish him well in his new role. The Secretary of State has informed the House of her intention to accept 89 recommendations from the independent review into HS2. I've not yet seen a copy of this report, which I believe is being released today. While we will need to study these proposals carefully before confirming our support for them, I can assure her that if they offer better value for taxpayers, we will back them. Finally, the Secretary of State has raised very serious concerns that taxpayers may have been defrauded by subcontractors. I would like to assure her that if that proves to be the case, I will share her anger and will support whatever action is necessary to get to the bottom of these allegations. I would request that she keeps the House informed as HS2 and HMRC's investigations progress. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to press the Secretary of State on a number of matters. In recent weeks, several projects have been announced by the government that are either funded by Network North or align with its commitments. However, we have yet to see a clear government commitment to either fully support the Network North plan or to scale it back. So can the Secretary of State now provide a definitive update on which elements will proceed and which will be abandoned? It has been reported that officials are considering a plan backed by the Mayor of Greater Manchester to build, and I quote, an HS2 light track between Birmingham and Crewe. Will she confirm if these reports are true? I would like to conclude by turning to the planning system more generally. The whole House will recall that HS2 grappled with legal challenges, High Court proceedings and judicial reviews, all of which added delay and cost. What assessment has the Secretary of State made of the extent to which legal challenges and judicial reviews delayed the delivery of HS2? How can future infrastructure projects be protected from excessive or politically motivated litigation? And finally, does the Secretary of State believe that sufficient action has been taken to prevent some of the more spurious concerns about such things as bats and newts obstructing future vital infrastructure projects?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his response and indeed for the tone in which he made his comments, and I was pleased to hear him acknowledge that mistakes had been made on HS2 by the previous government. I think he described the path as not being perfect. Mr. Speaker, I would go as far as saying it has been a shambolic mess. He did strike a sombre note in his remarks. I would ask him perhaps to consider going further once he's had the opportunity to read the full James Stewart report, because I do think an apology on the part of the party opposite for the mess that they left this infrastructure scheme in is undoubtedly warranted. I also thank him for the comments he made about the action that HS2 is taking with regard to the alleged fraud within the supply chain, and I can assure him that I will provide appropriate updates to this House on the progress with the HMRC investigation that is now underway. He also asked me to set out our plans for investment in transport in the Midlands and the North. His party, of course, took the decision to cancel HS2 north of Birmingham. They made wild promises about what they would do with the money that they claimed they were saving. He is kidding himself if he thinks that that money ever existed. What this government did last week in the spending review was set out £15.6 billion of money to invest in local transport schemes across the country, be that in Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle. His approach was a fantasy. He promised the moon on the stick and had absolutely no means to deliver. He asked me to set out the government's plans for enhancing rail connectivity further in the Midlands and the North, and I can assure him that further announcements will be being made, both as part of the government's 10-year national infrastructure strategy and beyond that in the weeks and months ahead. He also asked me to opine on the extent to which litigation has caused delays in the delivery of infrastructure project. He will know that through this government's planning and infrastructure bill, we are tackling this issue, limiting the number of judicial reviews and legal challenges that can be made, because unlike his party, this government is serious about delivering infrastructure. We are serious about providing the stable leadership that this country needs when it comes to infrastructure. I looked up before coming to the chamber today the number of rail ministers that existed in the department under his government, and it was a sum total of 18 in 12 years. It's no wonder that projects of like this were left in such a state of disarray. And so let me tell this House that just as this government has returned stability to the nation's economy, we will return common sense and stable leadership to the delivery of the nation's infrastructure too.
Chair of the Select Committee, Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd also like to add my thanks to the Secretary of State for the decisive action that she's taken on addressing the causes of the cost overruns on HS2, and we look forward to having Mark Wilde and the Rail Minister at our committee very shortly. First of all, I actually want to celebrate something that the HS2 leadership should be proud of, and that is the work they've done in skills and workforce innovation. They've provided best practice work across the construction industry and transport projects can and in fact are learning from. But finally, Mr. Speaker, could I urge the Secretary of State to get her department to learn from countries like France and Spain that have managed to deliver extensive high-speed rail projects to time and at a fraction of the cost of HS2 here in the UK.
I thank the Chair of the Transport Committee for her comments, and she is right to recognise the excellent work that HS2 have done on both skills and workforce. We have over 300,000 people working on this project at the moment, and opening up opportunity, be that in apprenticeships to the next generation, opening up opportunities through the supply chain. I think they have done good work on that, and I will heed her advice in learning from other countries about the speed and the ease with which they deliver infrastructure projects.
Paul Kohler, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and of advanced sight of it. What we've heard today is clearly a damning indictment of Conservative mismanagement. Connecting our largest cities with high-speed rail was meant to help boost economic growth and spread opportunity. The original idea, a high-speed rail network connecting London to Manchester and Leeds, was clearly the right one. However, what we end up with is years of delay and billions of pounds of taxpayers' money being poured down the drain with no end in sight. The litany of errors the Secretary of State has outlined is truly shocking. It shows the Conservatives were comatose at the wheel. A lack of oversight, trust and planning has left us with a high-speed railway drastically reduced in scale and inflated in price. The shocking allegations of fraud by a subcontractor are emblematic of the Tories' lack of oversight and disinterest in properly safeguarding the public interest and public money, as we have already seen in the scandal of PPE procurement during COVID. We must now make sure any money lost to fraud is clawed back as soon as possible. May I ask the Secretary of State three things? Can she guarantee that if any fraud has taken place, any money lost will be returned to the government and her department as soon as possible, and the police provided with the necessary resources to fully investigate the matter? The Secretary of State has said that the ministerial task force set up to provide oversight on HS2 had inconsistent attendance from the then Transport Secretary and Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Does the Secretary of State agree that these right honourable members should apologise for these particularly damning lapses? And thirdly, we share the Secretary of State's confidence in Mark Wilde and Mike Brown, but can she say when she expects to be able to give the House an accurate assessment of the full costs of the scheme and when HS2 will finally be up and running? Thank you.
The honourable gentleman raises three very fair issues, and I agree with his assessment that the previous government weren't just asleep at the wheel, they were comatose at the wheel. He asked whether the alleged fraud that has happened in the supply chain will be fully investigated and whether monies will be returned to the taxpayer. I can assure him that no stone will be left unturned in getting to the bottom of this matter. He's also right to highlight the question of poor and inconsistent attendance by previous individuals who held either my role or the Rail Minister's role and Treasury roles. I think it is imperative that politicians who have oversight for these infrastructure schemes stay close to the detail of what is happening, both through their own officials and directly with the executive and non-executive leadership of the project. That's certainly what I intend to do. I know the Rail Minister has a monthly meeting with the new Chief Executive. We've already held a meeting at the Ministerial Task Force. There's another one due very soon, and I've had multiple one-to-one conversations with the leadership team at HS2. He asks when I will be in a position to provide a full update on costs and schedule. Mark Wilde has told me that he will require until the end of this year to do that full piece of work. I'm not prepared to get ahead of that piece of work because I think that's the way that we've got into problems previously, but he can rest assured that as soon as I do have more information, in addition to the 6-monthly report that I provide to Parliament, I will come back to this House.
Graham Stringer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the latest national scandal in our attempt to bring in infrastructure schemes on budget and on time. But it's not only the taxpayer who is a victim in the failure of this project so far, it's also the people of the north of England. This was originally a scheme that was intended to help the economies of the North West and Yorkshire and those communities on the way with HS2. So there is a complete failure there. And what we're going to be left with is an extension to the London Underground system. That is not going to help people in Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Sheffield and elsewhere. And I would ask the Secretary of State to consider safeguarding the original routes, so when we get our infrastructure plans in place, we can build something that this country can be proud of.
I would just say gently to my honourable friend that I think the Mayor of the West Midlands might have something to say about his great city being seen as the end of an extension to the London Underground line. I think it's completely right that our two great cities, Birmingham and London, are connected with really high quality rail services. And whilst this is a difficult day in terms of exposing the state that the project is in, I have no doubt that in time this will be a railway that we can be proud of. I would also say to him that I am very aware of forecasted capacity constraints between Birmingham and Manchester and in other parts of the country. We are, of course, investing through things like the Transpennine route upgrade in improving connectivity to other great cities in the north of England. And we're determined to ensure that everyone, no matter where they live in the country, has an excellent public transport system that they can rely upon.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency has been devastated by roughly 26 miles of HS2. And I've consistently warned in this House over the last Parliament and this, through the lens of the frankly miserable experience on the ground in Buckinghamshire, of the reasons why there were cost overruns and poor governance and everything else that the Secretary of State has highlighted in her statement today. But if she must persist with this frankly wrong project on a new delay, will she give a commitment to my constituents and the rest of the county of Buckinghamshire how much longer they will have to live in misery as part of a building site? And more importantly than that, look urgently at unlocking some of the mitigation funds that frankly we are finding it incredibly hard to actually access and get spent on the ground as some small, tiny comfort for that human misery my constituents have to live in.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is absolutely essential that we proceed as quickly as possible with the remaining civil engineering works that will have affected his constituents to date. If he wishes to write to me with details of the problem that he has experienced with accessing mitigation funds, I will raise that for him with the Chief Executive of HS2.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives announced that they were scrapping the northern leg of HS2 in a former railway station, summing up their attitude to the railway industry and sending shockwaves through the industry, including through Derby, a rail city that will be building the HS2 trains. Will the Transport Secretary ensure certainty and timeliness going forward so that the industry can have confidence that we won't see the further delays which have already been so damaging for the supply chain?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that question, and she is right that certainty is critical for the rail supply chain. It will be a number of months before I'm in a position to confirm with any certainty the schedule and estimated final costs, but as soon as the new Chief Executive, Mark Wilde, has provided that information to me and my department, I will be updating the House.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State knows that HS2 runs through my constituency, and she will accept that what makes my constituents particularly angry about what she's described is that if you're unfortunate enough to find yourself in the path of this railway, HS2 has pinched every penny in compensating you and wasted millions elsewhere. So can she assure us that as part of the reset, line drawing, page turning, however she describes it, that will happen now, she will look as part of that at how people are compensated when they are affected by major infrastructure projects such as this? And will she also accept that it would be sensible to look at how Parliament can look again at a project whose budget and timescale has ballooned as this one has, and decide whether it still thinks it's worthwhile use of taxpayers' money?
I think the right honourable gentleman is right to point out that we do have some form as a country in seeking to gold plate infrastructure projects, and I know that the last government talked about this railway being the fastest and the best in the world, and quite frankly I would like this country to do things well and to do things properly. I think the point he raises about compensation is one that any government should keep under review, whilst bearing in mind the need to provide value for money to the taxpayer. And I can assure him that I will make sure that any future infrastructure projects that I am overseeing when I am in this role, I will make sure that the House is appropriately updated and we proceed with transparency on the costs and the benefits of the schemes in question.
Callum Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and the candidness with which she's delivered it. The villages that I represent in North Buckinghamshire, be it Toweston or Westbury, Quainton or North Marston, communities that I know the honourable gentleman, the member from Mid Buckinghamshire, will be very familiar with, have for too long faced chaos and disruption from HS2 and their contractors, and news that there will be yet more delay will cause them significant distress. So can she update the House and explain what additional support, practical support, financial or otherwise, her department plans to give rural communities like mine over the years ahead?
I think the biggest reassurance that I could give to my honourable friend is my cast iron commitment to make sure that we proceed as rapidly as possible with completing the remaining construction works, which I know will have had an impact upon his constituents. And whilst I can't commit to further compensation from the dispatch box today, if there are particular problems that his constituents are experiencing, he should not hesitate to bring those to the attention of me and my department.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement this afternoon, and I don't disagree with a word of her analysis of what's gone wrong in the past. The PAC, which I have the honour to chair, has 8 reports, comprehensive reports over the 13 years of this project. There are some common themes throughout those reports. Firstly, that her department, and I'm not in any way blaming her because this is what went on in the past, didn't have the right mix of skills to be able to challenge the assertions of HS2 Limited. Project managers, engineers, people who really know how to build a railway, firstly. Secondly, we found there was, in our report published on the 28th of February, a considerable disagreement between the amount of cost of this railway between HS2 and the department. The highest estimate was the top range of HS2, which was 66 billion in 2019 prices. That's over 80 billion in today's prices. So I think we do need to be assured fairly soon what this is going to cost. And thirdly, I'm not at all surprised that she's had to delay the date when this railway will be complete. But this is the second reset in 5 years. So we really want to see this reset working. And I think the people of this country will be very keen to know in her half-yearly report, if possible before, when this project is likely to be completed. Well done, Geoffrey.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for that contribution. I'd like to thank him and his colleagues on the Public Accounts Committee for the work that they've done over many years on this. He is right to highlight the need for skills within government to act as a strong client to HS2 Limited, and we also need to make sure that we've got the right commercial acumen within HS2 as well, and I know that's something that the Chief Executive is working on. I must disappoint him though. I think it is unlikely that in my next report to Parliament, which I think is due before the summer recess, that I will be able to provide any concrete information on a new schedule, window and a new cost envelope, because I think that work is going to take the Chief Executive towards the end of the year before we're in a position to make that information public.
Ella.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents know more than most the daily misery of HS2 construction, particularly in the villages of Waterorton and Kingsbury and the town of Coleshill, and they will welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement today. I met with the new CEO, Mark Wilde, on Monday to discuss the reset, and I'm delighted that he accepted my invitation to come to Waterorton to the Spud Club and talk to residents there. Does she agree with me, though, that it is time that the dust settles on this project, that we end the failure of oversight, the scandalous overspends and the suggested fraud. And the dust settles on the project rather than it settling on my clients' clean washing, their cars and their clean windows.
My honourable friend paints a graphic picture, and I do understand that when large infrastructure works are happening, then those who live closest to those schemes will often face disruption in their daily lives. And so let me put on record my thanks to the residents in Kingsbury, Coleshill and Morton Orton for their patience with this project. And I agree wholeheartedly with her that we do need to, once and for all, put an end to this cycle of overspends, delays and waste, and get on and build a railway that is fit for the 21st century.
Thank
you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The disastrous decision by the previous Conservative government to stop works at Euston Station dented investor and commuter confidence in our railways and in major infrastructure delivery. Their failure to keep costs under control and to manage the basics of the projects, simple things such as turning up to meetings, has created the quagmire that High Speed 2 finds itself in today, and I do not envy the task of the Minister. I'm glad to hear the Government sees the huge potential of a comprehensive redevelopment of Euston Station, but can the Minister reassure me that we will not end up with a cut-price station that does not realise the potential of the project?
I will provide that assurance to him. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to not only re-provide the existing Euston Station, which will frustrate many colleagues in this House at times and their constituents, I am sure, but also to provide the new HS2 station there and to unlock land around that station, both for the delivery of new homes, but there's a massive commercial regeneration opportunity in the heart of London as well. It's a really exciting opportunity and one that we will be saying more about in the coming weeks.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Delays in HS2 have blighted parts of West London around the main site at Old Oak. Benefits, when they finally arrive, will include a major rail interchange with Great Western and the Elizabeth line. Will the Secretary of State look at opening the Elizabeth line station at Old Oak as soon as is feasible, not waiting for HS2 to begin operations? And will she reclaim some of the goodwill of the people of West London by directing a tiny fraction of the costs of HS2 to the repair of Hammersmith Bridge?
With regard to his question about a possible earlier opening of an Elizabeth line station at Old Oak Common in advance of the HS2 station opening there, I will certainly speak with my colleague, the Rail Minister from the other place, and explore what the opportunities might be, and if I may, write back to him on that subject. He may also have heard in the spending review last week, the Chancellor announced that we are opening and funding a structures fund to enable local authorities who have assets which are very costly to repair to bid to government for help with repairing dilapidated bridges, tunnels, etc. And so I will be saying more about how that fund will operate in due course, and as we have done for many years, I'm sure we will be talking about Hammersmith Bridge again.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for the clarity of her statement. There's vast swathes of Staffordshire that are currently owned by HS2. A third of the village of Hopton is under HS2 ownership. This has an enormous impact on farmers, people who live along the route where there's so many empty houses sit. Can the Secretary of State give my constituents the reassurance that that farmland and those houses will be returned back to farmers and people who want to actually live in those communities?
I will be saying more on the safeguarded land and the directions that apply to the safeguarded land in due course.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for the actions she's taken today. Clearly well necessary, and it sounds like we are on a better track. However, HS2 provides little or nothing to the rail users in the South West, other than the ongoing delays during construction and operation of Old Oak Common. Will the Secretary of State consider funding or prioritising the funding for the critical final phase of the Dawlish rail resilience work that will help businesses and rail users in Devon and Cornwall, and perhaps even in Swindon?
Yeah. He tempts me into talking about the Dawlish scheme. I must admit this is a topic that I will need to take up with the Rail Minister, and I would be happy to provide a response in writing to him on the merits of that particular scheme.
Dr Ruperhook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for her honest setting out of this latest reset necessitated by the mess the Tories left. As MP for Old Oak Common, I found that this week 8 separate associations across 2 boroughs have banded together to create the Old Oak Alliance to fight for compensation and mitigation as it is. And for them, it will be bitterly disappointed that this is even more prolonged disruption now. I wondered if she might meet with me, or better still, come on a site visit to meet them and see what they're putting up with. Because we're dealing with a company here whose idea of engagement is jam tomorrow and death by PowerPoint.
I'm sure the leadership of HS2 would be very concerned to hear of that description of the way that the project is engaging with local people. That is not what I expect of an infrastructure company, and I'm sure it's not what the Chief Executive of HS2 Limited would want either. I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The previous government cancelled phase 2 of HS2, and from what the Minister said today, I understood it to be that it remains cancelled and phase 2 of HS2 won't be reinstated. That being the case, can the Minister let me know when the land that is now being safeguarded by HS2, particularly in the mid-Cheshire section, will be lifted?
I'm afraid I can't give the Honourable Lady a date today, but I can assure her that this is an issue that I am fully cognizant of. What we need to look at is whether there is any requirement in future for any future schemes, and as soon as we're in a position to provide updates, I will come back to this House and be sure to provide honourable members with all the relevant information.
Laura Kirkesmith.
Deputy Speaker, the HS2 line runs down the west side of Aylesbury, and it will bring no benefits to Aylesbury at all, I'm afraid, and yet my residents have suffered years of noise, disruption, flooding, loss of access to the countryside and destruction of their natural environment as a result of its construction. I'm pleased that the government is getting a grip on this, and I really commend the Secretary of State for her honesty and her focus on this today, but understandably my constituents will be concerned at the news of further delays and potential further disruption. So can the Secretary of State confirm that she will do everything in her power to hold HS2 and its contractors to account to minimise the ongoing disruption for my long-suffering residents?
I can assure my honourable friend that we are determined to see the main works civil engineering contracts completed as soon as possible. This, of course, is the element of construction that does generally create most disturbance to local communities, and we are pretty much at peak construction now. I would like to thank her constituents for their patience whilst we continue to deliver this vital new piece of rail infrastructure.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have campaigned against this HS2 project ever since 2010, up and down the line. I never believed the original 35 billion price tag. Furthermore, it only would have benefited rich businessmen and driven businesses from the north of England to London. It would have had the opposite effect. Has the moment not come, rather than having another reset, to recognise this is a failure? Let's scrap HS2. Let's use the tens of billions of pounds we can save in the next decade to upgrade railway lines across the entirety of the United Kingdom to the benefit of many millions and spend the rest on other national priorities in these financially straitened times. Surely the time has come to scrap the entirety of the project and recognise we've got it wrong.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not going to be a country that spends over £30 billion on rail infrastructure but then never sees a train running on it. We've already seen too much waste. I'm interested that he is advocating more. We also have significant capacity constraints between Birmingham and London. He seems not to want to do anything about that, but I think those two great cities in our country deserve a railway that's fit for the 21st century. I'm just sorry that he doesn't.
Dave Robertson.
Deputy Speaker, my constituency is the only one in the country which has HS2 Phase 1, Phase 2A and Phase 2B in it. And when we say that the line will not continue north of Birmingham, that is not true, because it will cut through miles of Staffordshire through my constituency north of Birmingham until it rejoins the main line at Handsacre. The failings of HS2 Limited have been clear to my constituents for years. And hearing today what we've always expected and the dereliction of oversight from the previous government is quite frankly shocking. People across Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages will be furious, and they are quite right to do so. Farmers and landowners and businesses in my constituency have been fighting tooth and nail with HS2 for years to just get them to do the job right. Whether it's compulsory purchases that have never been paid, temporary possessions which come with multitudinous back and forth and land agents taking massive fees over things that should have been sorted years ago, crop loss payments that never come, and many, many, many more. The people in Street A have had to deal with ongoing roadworks around a junction which has become far too overcomplicated by trying to put a railway underneath it, have seen the village at times almost cut off. People are absolutely sick of HS2. The failings of that organisation are absolutely multitudinous, and the failings of the party opposite to fully hold it to account should be an embarrassment to them and an embarrassment to this country. I really do welcome a reset, but it has got to lead to meaningful change on this. Can she give me and my constituents any assurances that this will be delivered as quickly as it possibly can be, with as little disruption as we can get away with? And can she finally give us a timeline on when the safeguarded land will be returned to landowners, because it's been going on for far too long?
I share my honourable friend's anger about this issue, and he is a powerful advocate for his constituents and the disruption that they have endured, and I agree entirely with him that it is a dereliction of duty on the part of the previous government, the way that this project was handled. It's why we've appointed new leadership. It's why we're accepting all the recommendations of the James Stewart Review, and why we're going through this fundamental reset. As soon as I have received advice from the new Chief Executive about the revised cost and schedule, I will be updating him along with other honourable members of this House.
Dr Andrew Merrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a South West Region MP, would the Minister agree with me that the West Country has for decades been the poor country cousin of our rail network? Agree also that money spent on HS2 is money not spent elsewhere, and do all in her power to ensure that the relatively small changes that are necessary on the network in the South West to make life a lot easier should go ahead, and in particular look at the absolutely woeful West of England line.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think there are challenges across the rail network, and I would readily accept that improvements are needed in many different parts of the country. I wouldn't necessarily accept that the South West is the poor cousin of the rail network, but I can assure him of my determination to make sure that everyone, no matter where they live in this country, has a better rail service at the end of this Parliament than they did at the beginning of it.
Jacob Collier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Transport Secretary will know that my constituents have endured years of disruption and drawn out and poorly managed roadworks as they drive past Lichfield on the A38. Given the billions of pounds that have been squandered by the previous government and this disruption continues, can she say more about how she's going to get a grip on this project to ensure that we have vigorous oversight and that it is delivered effectively and on time for our constituents.
We've appointed new leadership. We are establishing new governance. We are looking at the incentives contained in the contracts on the civil engineering works. We will make sure that there is no stone left unturned in providing value for money for the taxpayer on this, because it's a significant, very significant investment that this country is making, and we do need to ensure that every penny is wisely spent.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The costs of HS2 have now spiralled to over £100 billion. Welsh taxpayers are paying dearly for this appalling mess, even though we get no benefits whatsoever. Wales is now owed at least £5 billion. This isn't going to go away. So when will we get our fair share?
The Honourable Lady may have heard that the Chancellor announced in the spending review over £400 million of investment over 10 years in the Welsh railways. That will enable work to take place on the Burn stations in South Wales, at Padeswood Sidings on the North Wales line. This is a significant investment in Welsh railways, the like that hasn't been seen for many, many years.
I'll be calling Steve Darling after Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as Shadow Transport Secretary for 4 years, I was wholly supportive of this concept. I just want to correct the member for Clacton, who completely misunderstands the basis of it, because the purpose, I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me, was to deliver capacity for the north of England. Speed was a misnomer, but that opportunity has now been lost. I just wonder if she could give me some assurance that with the upgrade to the TransPennine upgrade, that those skills and expertise will be rolled out across the entire north of England, not just the northwest and Yorkshire, but through up into the northeast, to include the continuing rolling programme of electrification. I'm specifically thinking of the Northallerton through to Middlesbrough and beyond, because that is where we get the GVA and economic growth from. Can we have some assurance that those ambitions will not be fettered one jot by this damning indictment of the last 15 years of failure?
I can assure my honourable friend that this government 100% recognises the need to improve rail connectivity in the Midlands and the North. He's also right to highlight the need for a pipeline of investment, a stable pipeline, so that the supply chain can plan and we don't lose skills. We've got an ambitious programme as the government on rail, things like East West Rail, as well as the TransPennine route upgrade HS2. And I'm determined that we build on this country's proud railway heritage and make sure that we've got railways moving forward that are fit for the modern day.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Devon and Cornwall rail network are only one severe storm away from being decapitated at Dawlish. Phase 5 of the South West Rail Resilience Network is desperately needed. When will the Minister come and visit the line to see how desperately needed it is? Thank you.
I do know that Dawlish is a very beautiful part of the country, and so I am very tempted to take him up on his invitation. I know this is the second time in this statement that the issue with the Dawlish programme has been raised. I undertook to his colleague to speak to the Rail Minister about that subject, and I will come back to him in writing at the same time as I do to his colleague.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today. HS2 has been an abject failure of political accountability by the last administration. On transport efficiencies, can I ask the Secretary of State to press on with reforms to the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency to fix the driving test system to keep our country moving?
We do have a really important programme of work across all the arm's length bodies of the Department for Transport, including DVSA. It is really important that we provide public services in an efficient way and an effective way. And I'm very conscious of perhaps his constituents and those of other honourable members who may be very keen to see rapid progress on driving test wait times, and I can assure him that that is a focus of the discussions that I'm having with the DVSA at present.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. As I too served on the PAC, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today. I know from that work that whilst HS2 is by far the largest civil infrastructure programme in the United Kingdom, the second largest is the Lower Thames crossing from Tilbury to Gravesend, currently budgeted at about £10 billion. If her tighter approach to HS2 produces savings, is there any way that some of those might be vired to help pay for the Lower Thames crossing? And if not, which private sector companies exactly are going to pay for it? Because so far, I'm afraid, the government has been rather vague on that point.
We are exploring finance options with regard to the Lower Thames crossing. We announced on Monday of this week £590 million of public funding this year to take forward utility works, some land purchases. I will be saying more to this House in future about the private finance arrangements that we are exploring.
Clive Efford.
Mr. Speaker, I commend my right honourable friend on the swift actions that she's taken to try and put right this disastrous situation created by the previous government. The parallels here between the fast-track contracts for PPE can't be ignored. I understand that contracts were signed that where the appropriate decisions hadn't been made prior to those contracts being signed. Will those people who sign those contracts be interviewed? Will they have to explain why they decided to take these decisions against advice? And will we be getting any of that money back?
As I said in my statement, the Prime Minister has asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate whether the James Stewart report raises any questions for the civil service or wider public sector. He's completely right to highlight this point about contracts being signed with construction companies even before the scope of the works had been concluded. So it's little wonder that we as a country have ended up paying more when we've signed a contract with a company to deliver works, and yet there was no clarity whatsoever about what the work was that the government wanted them to do. And so this is a dreadful and woeful failing of oversight on the part of previous government ministers, and it's one that I won't allow to happen on my watch.
Lisa Smart.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I was elected to this place, I was a member of HS2's independent panel for the Community and Environment Fund and the Business and Local Economy Fund, and the Secretary of State's statement today makes for some pretty shocking reading. Talk of fraud and of shambolic mismanagement should bring shame on everybody involved in it. One of the problems with HS2 was always the naming of it, focusing on speed rather than on capacity. My Hazel Grove constituents use the West Coast Main Line, and they talk to me about the problems of capacity still remaining. Indeed, I see it every week when I come up and down to work. The Secretary of State has said that she's not reinstating the line from north of Birmingham. She's also talked about Transpennine work that's underway. What specific work is being undertaken by her department looking at capacity on the West Coast Main Line north of Birmingham?
I am aware that the mayors of the West Midlands and Greater Manchester have put some proposals to the government on particularly this issue about the fact that in the mid-2030s we're likely to see severe capacity constraints between Birmingham and Manchester. We're reviewing those proposals, and I hope to be able to say more on that in the months ahead.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and could I thank the Secretary of State for the honesty in which she's addressed these very difficult issues. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I also ask the Secretary of State to say a little bit more about the lessons that can be learnt from the success of the Elizabeth Line, both in terms of the far superior leadership and management in the programme, but also the economic benefits that have been generated, with £18 billion invested in capital, yielding £42 billion of benefits just in the first 3 years of this amazing piece of infrastructure.
I must admit that the delivery of the Elizabeth line, whilst it was one of my proudest achievements when I was serving as the Deputy Mayor for Transport in London, it wasn't without its challenges as well. I would reflect that the trust that existed ultimately between Transport for London and the delivery project and the transparency and honesty with which different parts of the system work with one another was one of the final ways in which we got that project over the line. And it was one of the proudest days for me to see Her Former Majesty Queen Elizabeth come and open the Elizabeth line at Paddington shortly before she passed away. There is a lot of learning that we need to take from Crossrail. We are doing that, and we are determined to get on and see this railway opened.
Blake Stevenson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, East West Rail is due to travel through my constituency of Mid Bedfordshire on the historic Marston Vale line. Can the Secretary of State set out how she'll ensure that the mistakes made on HS2, and we've heard some shocking stories today, won't also be made on East West Rail? I'm afraid there's very little confidence in the East West Rail Company, and it's important that my communities are listened to and that we ensure that we deliver this infrastructure faster at lower cost and that people who are impacted are properly compensated.
The nature of East West Rail is fundamentally different from the construction of HS2. He will know that it has been delivered in 3 phases. It's only the latter phase of that between Bedford and Cambridge which will actually necessitate the construction of new track. I know the Chief Executive of East West Rail, David Hughes, is determined to deliver that scheme rapidly, offering good value for money to the taxpayer and making sure that he properly engages with communities. If there are any particular issues that the Honourable Gentleman is concerned about, he should raise those with me and I will gladly speak with the leadership there.
Luke Charters.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on Public Accounts Committee I asked HS2 bosses what I thought was a relatively simple question. How much are they spending on nuke mitigation? And they could not give an answer. And similarly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm to the House that I have information that suggests that the so-called back tunnel is well north of the purported £100 million in cost. So can I commend the Secretary of State for her leadership that she's shown today, and will she hold HS2 accountable for some of these batshit crazy costs?
I can assure my honourable friend that the estimated cost of the batch structure is £95 million in 2019 prices. And I agree with him that we cannot have a regime of environmental mitigations where this sort of thing continues to happen. The government has put forward significant reforms in this space, and we will continue to monitor the need for further changes so that we can deliver infrastructure in a better way.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome and thank the Secretary of State for giving a candid and transparent statement to this House. In relation to Birmingham, in fact, I'm the only Birmingham MP here, I'm quite surprised. It's going to be disappointing that there's going to be a delay, there's going to be additional costs, but there's always a silver lining in the cloud. Birmingham, Perry-Barr, my constituency, has some of the highest unemployment, 17%, 4 times the national average. In addition to that, we have a number of local stations that have been closed. That would improve the network if they were reopened. Would the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss how we can get Birmingham Perry-Barr constituents into jobs and a possibility of opening 3 stations, Handsworth Wood, Soho Road and City Health Campus?
Yeah, yeah.
I'd be very happy to ask the Rail Minister to meet with him about those stations in Birmingham that he raises.
Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the statement from the Secretary of State. But may I speak today of the East of England? The member for Richmond famously promised a dividend when he cancelled HS2 North. So can she tell us whether we might expect some of this to replace the crucial Hawley and Ely junctions to finally sort out the rail connections in the East of England?
Very good.
I do understand the importance of the Ely area scheme in terms of rail infrastructure. And I do hope to be saying more about rail investments in the weeks before the summer recess.
Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Secretary of State set out what steps she is taking to ensure that infrastructure like the £100 million BAT tunnel won't be included in future projects such as East-West Rail?
I can tell the honourable gentleman that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill includes proposals to reform species and habitats protection, the proposals for environmental delivery plans and the Nature Recovery Fund do enable a shift to protecting the whole population of species rather than a purely local consideration, and this will provide for better outcomes for nature without incurring unreasonable costs like the HS2 BAT mitigation structure.
Tom Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for her answer to my honourable friend, the member for Hazel Grove, regarding capacity on the West Coast Main Line, because Stockport is the one place where it's at full capacity, and HS2 was meant to solve this. But now, because of the cancellation of the northern leg, the HS2 trains, we now face HS2 trains going through Stockport's already packed lines. I welcome the response regarding the plans put forward by the mayors of West Midlands and Greater Manchester. But can I ask, will the Secretary of State commit to engaging with Stockport Council on those plans? Because we do need to find a solution to this capacity issue, because it could hold my borough back for decades.
Yeah.
I am very conscious of the need to invest in improved public transport in Stockport, and if the council would like to write to me with any relevant information, I will gladly consider it. I'd also point out to him the good news that the announcement a couple of weeks ago about our investment in transport for the city regions holds for Stockport, with the extension of the metro link to there, which I hope he will welcome as good news for his constituents.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It may surprise her, but I actually have some sympathy with the Secretary of State for inheriting the HS2 nightmare. But when she receives the updated budget and timeframe, is there a cost and a timeline at which point she says enough is enough, it's better to stop, or is it an open-ended chequebook?
If the honourable gentleman had actually bothered to read the spending review last week, he will have seen that we have committed £25 billion over the next 4 years. That enables work to be taken forward, and I will be, as I have said on a number of occasions in this session, updating the House when I have further information available about both the overall cost envelope, the estimated final cost at completion, and the anticipated schedule.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With a decade of delay and costs spiralling to eye-watering sums of anywhere between 60 and 100 billion pounds, and now with credible allegations of fraud within the supply chain, can I ask the Secretary of State what steps the government will be taking to recover hard-working taxpayers' money from fraud, hold those responsible to account, and announce a final stop of waste of money?
I've said on a number of occasions, Madam Deputy Speaker, that billions of pounds of taxpayers' money has been wasted by constant scope changes, ineffective contracts and bad management. That is what this reset of HS2 is all about. It's why we've appointed the new leadership, and it's why we're fundamentally changing the governance structures. As I said in answer to previous questions, the matter about potential fraud in the supply chain is being investigated by HMRC, and we will be providing updates to the House as and when further information is available.
That concludes the statements.